Hello friends, it's Kayla. Welcome to day 3 of however many days of la 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 la. It's the series where I make end of year videos every day until I run out of ideas. Behind me, you'll see all the books that I rated this year under a 3-star. They're all represented here and I'm going to go through all of them, and then I'm going to feature between 5 and 10 of what I consider my least favorites, most disappointing, whatever it is I'm titling this video. We're not going to do a disclaimer because I'd rather argue with a couple people in the comments than bore the couple thousand people just wanting me to get to the books already. Now, I had almost 50 1- and 2-star reads this year. It looks like a lot, and it is a lot. But I read 280 books this year, so this represents, I think, 16% of everything that I read. That's it. Naturally, when you read a lot, there's gonna be a lot of wins, a lot of losses. At least that's how it is for me. So the main reason I'm not upset about the number here is because a lot of these were expected, and I'll go through the titles and explain why. This entire first stack essentially is things that I read kind of out of my control. So things decided for me for videos, things I picked out of my members TBR jar, a couple things that were sent to me that I wanted to give a go. I didn't have high expectations for any of these. We've got The Survival of Molly Southbourne by Tade Thompson, Wow No Thank You by Samantha Irby, Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, His and Hers by Alice Feeney, Only Mostly Devastated by Sophie Gonzalez, The Water Cure by Sophie McIntosh, Manhunt by Gretchen Felker Martin. I realized I need to go through this faster. Hair House by Sally Hinchcliffe. A Certain Hunger by Chelsea G. Summers. Could you see that cover? 7 Days by Patrick Senecal. Winter Set Hollow by Jonathan Edward Durham. Jar of Hearts by Jennifer Hillier. Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulick. Sugar Run by Misha Marin. Hench by Natalie Zena Walshots. We've got The Mars Room by Rachel Kushner, Mercury Boys by Chandra Prasad, What Should Be Wild by Julia Fine, and If I Disappear by Eliza Jane Brazier. Now, some of these were on my TBR, but a lot of them had been on my TBR for so many years, I didn't know if I would actually like them. And these last 3 were specifically for a video called Reading the Lowest Rated Books on my Goodreads, so none of them should have surprised me, though I had some favorites from that video. The next entire stack I can't be too mad at because it's romance, cozy mysteries, and one reread that I knew wasn't gonna be a win. As I explored my softer side this year, we had some wins and losses within these genres, which was totally expected. So, The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang, Whispers in the Roars by Kay Webster, Love on the Brain by Ali Hazelwood, Get a Life Chloe Brown by Talia Hibbert, Waking Olivia by Elizabeth O'Rourke, The Sizzle Paradox by Lily Menon, Reminders of Him by Colleen Hoover, You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akweke Emezi, Hook, Line, and Sinker by Tessa Bailey. Then there's A Bad Day for Sunshine by Dorinda Jones, Arsenic and Adoba by Mia P. Manansala, Renovated to Death by Frank Anthony Polito, and The Love That Split the World by Emily Henry. And then we've got this final stack, which is books that I've just selected for myself and thought I would like. Though I can't be too mad at this first stack because I had never read from these authors before, so my expectations of them was like silly that it was high. My least favorite anthology of the year is called Other Terrors. It was horror. Didn't really feel like horror. White Horse by Erica T. Worth. A History of Wild Places by Shay Earnshaw. Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed. Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. And then these ones, I had had experience with that author before. So this is like my saddest stack, the stack that I feel saddest about. But the 2 at the bottom are just like YA. People are gonna say this isn't YA. This is YA fantasy series that, like, was I set up to enjoy anyway? I don't know. In a Garden Burning Gold by Rory Power and Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. And finally, the ones we're gonna talk about at length, my highly anticipated ones, the most disappointing to me. We had Seasonal Fears by Shannon McGuire, Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey, The Centaur's Wife by Amanda LeDuc, The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley, Hide by Kirsten White, and Cherish Farah by Bethany C. Morrow. Now let's get into the whys of it all. So my most disappointing mystery thriller that I had hyped up for myself was The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. I picked this as a book club pick. Some book club members enjoyed it, a lot didn't. There's a whole live show about it. And despite me talking about this at length with 3 other people for an hour, it's so incredibly forgettable. I don't even remember what went on in this story. I know that we have a woman and she goes to stay in her brother's Paris apartment and he's not there, and she's gonna solve the mystery. But it's more so like all of these different people in the apartment building, and we get their POVs and we get their history and their backstory and their interpersonal drama. I remember being irritated by how many characters were in here, not just the POVs, but each character would talk about like 3 to 4 other characters, bring their names into the mix, and I never knew who was important, like who I needed to remember, who was going to be responsible for anything, and it turned out to not really be much of anybody. So I guess for me, I'm left with the feeling of there was a lot of wasted time in here. I guess the reveals weren't interesting enough for me. And I especially remember the backstories, all of them like revealing what they had been through, what their pasts were like. I remember rewriting a lot of their stories in my head, like, oh, they're about to reveal this, and then they didn't. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it have been cool if this had really been their past history? I'll definitely try Lucy Foley again. I enjoyed the guest list, but it just wasn't a big win for me. The other Literally Dead book club selection that flopped for me and a few others was Hide by Kirsten White. I think just because this is so short, and because again it's following so many different perspectives, it just wasn't the story that I was looking for. When you're playing a hide and seek game with high stakes for a lot of money in an amusement park, it just didn't give like the fun amusement park of it, the spooky atmosphere. The game wasn't even that much a part of it. I think what it needed for me was more mystery and more tension, mainly. It definitely lacked gore and lacked adult characters to me. They all read very teen. It felt like a YA horror. All the POVs just didn't give enough for me. The ending of all of them were very abrupt, which I understand the purpose for, but I didn't enjoy it. Considering the actual reveal of this all and what's going on, I can't believe how not high stakes it felt, and then had a very like action movie sequence at the end that was over the top. It never felt scary or unsettling, so it wasn't my favorite. Okay, enough of me roasting my own book club selections. Let's get into a couple other horror things, because horror generally is divisive, and not all the horror that I pick up I'm going to love anyway. But these ones I had high hopes for, because we've got a social horror and a spooky house horror, and I'd read from both of these authors before. So with Sarah Gately and Just Like Home, the setup was really intriguing. This woman is going back to her family home. Her father is this infamous serial killer. Her mother is dying, and there's something weird going on in the house, with the house. And my main issue with this was how there were so many mysteries and they just kept getting stacked on top of each other, and that's not my favorite plot to follow. I want there to be reveals and twists and turns throughout a story, and not just one main mystery and then we don't get to solve that until the very last page, and between the first and last page there's just 10 more mysteries that we just keep wondering about. There's just a general curiosity of what's going on in this house, why she's finding these notes around from her father, who the random guy who's living in the house is, and it's just not really a pace that I enjoyed, because at the end we get this big reveal, but I didn't like it. It was bizarre. And if that was going to be the ending, I said this in my review, but it just should have been that for longer. The same way that I feel about a romance book, where I just want the people to be together for a good portion of the book for me to enjoy that portion. If we're going to have a reveal and something very strange is going on, I don't want that to just be a reveal and then the book is over. Like, I want to sit in that for a minute. I definitely get the people whose brand of horror this is. It's just not mine, and that's fun to know. Then we have Cherish Farah, which as a social horror should have been something I really enjoyed. And I do think that the idea, the concept, the reveal in here, it's all good. The things that Bethany Morrow is saying, I like, as far as the manipulative and sinister kind of tone that we get. So there's these two best friends, and they both live with one of the girl's parents. She's kind of being adopted into this family, and there's something wrong in the house. That's what the synopsis says. It wanted to be swim fan, Black Swan, Get Out vibes. And with the reveal in the end that I appreciated, I think so much got accomplished in here, but I don't know that she knew how to tell this story. So for 200 pages, it's just the exact same conversations and plot and tension just over and over and over again. And you get to the point where you understand nothing's going to be revealed until the last page. And for me, this far into it, the book spoils itself, in my opinion, gives away what that big reveal is going to be, and then I was just waiting for so long to get told that that's what it was. And I think I could have gotten on board if I was having fun at any point, or I thought anything was interesting, but it really was just strange, a little absurd and silly, but not in a fun way. Very exhausting being in this girl's mind for a very, very long time with the same scenes over and over again. I feel similarly about The Centaur's Wife by Amanda Leduc as far as the message. I think this book had a clear intent with what it wanted to say, the groups of people it wanted to highlight, but then it kind of flopped when it came to the actual plot, and I don't think the book knew what it wanted to do. It starts out interesting enough with this apocalypse and a group of people who have to come together, and then they're just surviving, and they're building this new community and government for much of the book, and it's just a lot of drama interpersonally. And then you throw in this storyline of the centaurs who have been like banished from town, sent away up into the mountains, but I think that the book should have featured them in a different way, in a bigger way, because when we went to visit the centaurs and what went on with their own community, I was confused. And because of that portion of the plot and the reveals within that, it almost goes back on the intent and the message that the book wants to give. And then also there are sections that are fairy tales. And with me not being familiar enough with fairy tales, I don't know if these are origin stories or if they're taking a new take on these stories. I think this book was written with the understanding that the reader would have a very thorough and deep connection and understanding of fairy tales. And even having read her nonfiction that I love so much, I just was not familiar enough with the concepts to understand what the purpose was of those insertions. I think the saddest thing about this is it didn't give me any feelings. There was no feeling of joy, of happiness, of sadness, of romance. Like there was no feelings throughout the entire thing, just a general like melancholy misery that these people were experiencing for so long. I guess I should move into Seasonal Fears next, even though I don't want to talk about it. This is a sequel to my favorite book, Middle Game by Seanan McGuire, and it is not really a sequel. At least the pitch of it was that it's a standalone story that takes place after Middle Game, but it's not a sequel. And I think it is a sequel. Roger and Dodger, my favorite characters of all time, they do exist in this story, and they exist in this story for far longer than I had hoped. It didn't feel like a little nod, a little fun reference, like they kind of took a bulk of the story that I wasn't expecting. But we are following a set of people who are connected. This series is about the alchemical arts and people created to ascend to godhood or to control seasons in this case. And there was just a lot of things in here that I don't typically like. This is a road trip story, and also it has a really established relationship at the forefront. And I think that'll be fun for some people to see the love between these two people and what they're fighting for. But for a book to be leading to this grand competition, there was no competition at the end of it, and at least not the competition that I had hoped for or felt like we were building to, about like controlling the seasons and power, and I was left very unfulfilled by the end. I think because Seanan McGuire in general, and especially this series, is such low plot, you really have to love the characters to love the story, and I did in the first book, and I didn't so much in this one. So that's the 6 that I felt like ranting about. I think I could find a couple more in here though that maybe are less warranted for me to rant about, but I still will. So A History of Wild Places was my first read of the entire year, and it was a 1 star, and I'm still sad about it. But I know that this is my least popular opinion of this entire stack. It has a pretty high average rating, so I would still definitely recommend it to people. It reminded me a bit of The Centaur's Wife, with like mostly being about a community, and this like cult-like situation probably isn't my favorite plotline to read about anyway. But it introduces these ideas because we have this small-knit community and the people who are trying to figure out if it's actually safe for them, if the illness they're told about that the community is saving them from, if that's real, if they can leave. And I like that idea in general, but when we introduce the idea of this like kind of detective guy finding out, like looking for these missing people, his storyline and the almost like supernatural idea of him touching things and finding out things, that was completely gone. That wasn't really the story at all. I found it really slow. I found it really boring and repetitive. And then the book spoils itself. There are a couple errors in here that I have been told future editions and the audiobook have fixed. I can't like guarantee that, but there is objectively like the wrong, like there's an error in here that if you're just listening to the audiobook on double speed, maybe you wouldn't notice, but it was distracting and ruined like the tension going forward from that point. I don't have much more to say about this. It was a year ago now that I read it. I just think it's so beautiful, and I wish that it was a favorite. Then let me talk about Renovated to Death by Frank Anthony Polito, because I did like some cozy mysteries this year, a decent amount. And this was by far the worst one that I read, and it makes me want to bump up a whole star to every other cozy mystery that I read. In this, we're following two men who are renovating houses. No, they're not. There wasn't enough renovation in here. Issue number 1. Issue number 2, somebody dies and they're solving the mystery. You know who killed that person immediately upon reading the reactions from everybody who finds out the person died. Issue 3. While cozy mysteries often feature characters of people over the top characteristics, this was completely over the top, and every single character had the same personality after their initial introduction of like the hero or the villain or the whoever. They all reverted into this the most obnoxious perspective. It definitely lacked a lot of emotional depth. You never really understood how anybody was feeling. The reactions, the conversations between people felt weird and confusing. There was a lot of inconsistencies, and there was a lot of repetition as far as like the main character that we're following, him introducing us to various ideas in his life, but over and over and over again. I think it needed some more editing. And then lastly, I just want to talk about What Should Be Wild by Julia Fine, because though I read this in like a lowest rated exploration video, I really thought this could have been a win, and people have been telling me that I will really like this because I like nature-based magic and like weird, ambiguous magical ideas. So we're following this girl, and the concept is so interesting because she like can't touch anybody, and I thought it would be an exploration of this girl and the emotional turmoil that she's going through, and like her not being able to experience certain like romantic connection, not being able to hug her own father, like all of these feelings and what comes along with it, and the things that it does to your psyche and your perception of the world and human connection. But then it just turned out to be this weird, like 200 pages of this girl just like walking through the woods and falling in love with this boy like immediately. It was not fun to read. As far as the plot being a little bit whimsical, the writing did not reflect that. And again, it was like it took itself very seriously, and it was very miserable and melancholy the entire time, which did not reflect the concepts and the ambiguity of like what's reality, what's not. And then outside of those 200 pages, it is her ancestors and their very lengthy stories. So we just visit like one of them for, I don't know, sometimes 2 pages, sometimes 10 pages, a different person every time. And I'm sure there's some goal with how those are connected. The book is trying to say something, but because the ending was just bad, in my opinion, it didn't take the opportunity to like rope everything together and give me a reason why we were reading all of these other storylines that didn't matter. And they were mostly about like odd relationships, incest, like sexual encounters these young women were having. I know it's saying something, I just don't think the book told me enough. And I'm gonna stop there at a very unsatisfying 9 books. There are other things that I gave 1 and 2 stars, but I don't feel like I need to rant about them, or I read them so recently that my mental and emotional state are fine not revisiting them and talking about them again. So there's that. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow with something else. Bye.